Coming up, friend of the show, Matthew Newton, interviews a down-to-earth nurse practitioner and former Navy corpsman who has developed some serious leadership chops. This is part 1 of 2 of their conversation, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Plan B CRNA Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA Podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Plan B CRNA Podcast. Today, I have a very special episode for you. Today, we dive into the management and leadership side of healthcare. My guest today is a nurse practitioner and the executive director of advanced practice providers at one of our nation's premier healthcare institutions. He served our country as a Navy corpsman. He's single-handedly responsible for developing and managing the APP program at a level 1 trauma center. Apart from being an exemplary nursing role model and leader of the community, he's a proud husband and father of 5. I'm proud to introduce you to Drew Matey. Drew, it's great to have you on the show.
Glad to be here. Single-handedly is it's not single-handed, there's a lot of hands. That's for sure.
Teamwork, but you definitely deserve props when it's due.
I'll take it.
So, I always like to start off by asking, one of my most important questions I ask to everybody is what's your goal in life? Why do you do what you do?
Well, it's funny, like I sit for a lot of presentations and hear a lot of prolific folks talk, and they have these really profound stories about their why. But my why's, I think, a little different. I mean, obviously I have a large family and I have to provide for them, and I enjoy to do all the things that that my kids like and I like, and I want to provide for them. But then I also like to have fun. I like to enjoy myself and challenge myself every day for the most part. I tend to jump in the deep waters more times than not. And I think that's kind of my why, is I enjoy working my back away from the wall. And it's fun to see the fruits of your labor. But I don't have, my life is kind of like, it resembles like flying by the seat of your pants, like for the past, 20 years since I was in the military, and even before that, high school and everything. So my why is really simple. It's just challenge myself, break through as many barriers as I can, and figure out when the next barrier is going to smack me in the face. And that I enjoy that.
That's great though. Cause and I get that. I'm kind of the similar situation where I enjoy a challenge, like having that next thing that I'm working to build and overcome is the satisfaction in itself.
Agree.
So tell me a little bit about what you do for a living and, the path that kind of brought you here where you are today.
Yeah. So I'm executive director over advanced practice providers. So, it's nurse practitioners and PAs. We don't refer to them any differently in an inpatient setting. Other than some regulatory stuff and setting up agreements with physicians, there's really not a difference. So operationally, I'm over multiple groups of APPs that cover different services: CV ICU, medical ICU, surgical ICU, level 1 trauma center, trauma, which is outside the ICU, acute phase, which is ground floor, kind of like resuscitation, part of the care for trauma patients. And then, newly burned. So just like a smattering, like very different groups. And so I'm kind of operationally over all of that and developing those programs, making sure they're staffed, making sure that we're kind of working with the medical directors and the nursing staff to keep people on the straight and narrow as well as progressing. So And, we come with managing people. You got to eat your vegetables. It ain't sexy all the time. And there's a lot of petty stuff you have to deal with. But I think, that's part of the challenge is to, continue to manage what you think are petty things and then make them less petty and more rewarding for your staff and yourself. So you don't have to deal with it as much as it's kind of like a stock market kind of trend where, in due time, hopefully those things go down, but you're never get away as as an operational leader. You never, don't have a problem to solve. And I feel like if that was the case, then they probably wouldn't need me. If the job was that easy, they could just find somebody else. So I pride myself on doing something that's relatively difficult. And I try to make it as easy as possible for myself, obviously.
Well, but it's funny because people think when they think of management, they think that you just go to your office, you close the door, and you play mahjong. They don't realize how much work actually goes into it. That management is, whereas you may not be 100% by the bedside, you're constantly problem solving. Your phone never turns off, and it's just a constant pull. People don't typically realize that. So tell me a little bit about. So you started off in the military, and then you went to be a nurse, and then moved up to NP. What got you into the military, and what was that like?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny it is, but I was finishing my bachelor's degree, and I've always wanted to go in the military, and I was just going through some stuff in my life, and I promise you, I just woke up one day and I was like, because my mom moved when I graduated high school. She moved to Ohio. And so, like when you're not really making a living for yourself and you're going to school, you're kind of living under your mom and just like helping you out. And I think I was just wanted to go out on my own and do my thing. And I think that military was like not the easiest way, but it was the way that I felt like I could just do that. So I I only had like maybe a semester and a half, something. There wasn't a lot left, and I just quit and upped and went to the military, and that's that's kind of how that happened. So it's like I told you, jumping in over my head, flying by the seat of my pants. I mean, countless stories and how that works, and it's funny, actually. You go to the little center and you sign up, and they offer you all these different positions and contracts, and they're like, oh, you can be a hospital corpsman. You get a $5,000 bonus. And it's like basically like a 2-year. It works out to be something around a 2-year commitment. I was like, oh, that's great. Hospital corpsman. You sit in a hospital, you get a bonus. You're young and dumb, and you're like $5,000, and you think you're going to be like rich or something stupid. And then it's funny when it was during, when we were in Iraq. We moved from Afghanistan to Iraq from a military perspective, engagement perspective, and went to boot camp. And I remember them saying, "Who's a corpsman?" And there's another one, a CB, and like everybody raised their hand, including myself, and they were like, "Y'all are going to war. Did you know that?" And I was just like, "What?" And you're guaranteed in this contract, you're guaranteed a sea deployment. And so like in Navy, you think you're like on a ship. No, bro, I never saw a ship. I didn't realize that Marines were a department of the Navy. And so like the Army has what everybody calls medics, right? The Marines don't have that. They have corpsmen that work in the field with them. So they call us dirt sailors because we don't go on a ship. And I literally went to boot camp. And then I went to hospital corps school, which is 3 months long. And then you go to like a field medicine course. It's 14 weeks. It's actually really interesting. It's where the first Black Marines were trained. And so obviously it was in a separate part of the base, but it's really cool because they've kept like the spirit. It's just, they kind of kept it up, and they have like all the pictures of the Black Marines. So it's actually very historic that a lot of people probably will never see. But you go there for 14 weeks and they kind of teach you how to be a Marine, how to wear the uniform. So you have like a Marine instructor who's a hard ass. They're all hard asses. And then you have like a Navy instructor, and they kind of teach you how to be a Marine. So you do that for another 3 months. And then like I said, signed up to go to war. So basically, boom, I hit the field, and then I was out in the field for a month, like camping out. Like, I'm like, what in the hell have I got myself into?
That is incredibly interesting. And, and it's interesting. I mean, it goes back to the whole just jump in and you figure it out as you go. It's it's what's your next big, challenge. And that's awesome. So I've actually heard through my training from fellow CRNAs that the military has some pretty unique methods of teaching life support, triage, and medical care in the field. Did you experience anything along those lines?
Yeah, well, like obviously I was like 21 or 22 or something like that. And so like I was young, and like I said, I'm over here thinking $5,000's gonna give me like a payday. So I'm obviously have no idea about life in general. And so like they actually, I think just because I'd done a lot of college and I was pretty together like mental capacity wise, I could like pick things up really quickly. They put me in this course where it's in preparation to go overseas. And they take I guess they're pigs, I don't know, and they injure them in multiple capacities. I'm being nice. And then you as a group of corpsmen, which I was the youngest in my group, you have to go save the pig, and you get to do like all these procedures. Like you keep them alive for, half a day. They're anesthetized, they don't move around, stuff like that. And then ours got, hit by C4, and it's in the distance. So you don't see it happen, and you got to like run. And you got to save them. And actually, the guy that I was with is like a total badass. Like, I remember he had me hold pressure real strong, as hard as I could, and then lift it up. And some guy was trying to hold the femoral artery, and then boom, you could see the artery where it was bleeding. And then he clipped it with hemostats and stopped the bleeding. And we just made sure the pig wasn't bleeding anymore. And then boom, we put it on a gurney, ran it back to the tent, and then you keep it alive. You get intubated, put in chest tubes, and you go through this whole field medicine course. And I just wish that I was like, had some more maturity back then, because I just probably could have learned so much. The guy who taught it was super interesting. You could tell he looked like a science experiment himself. I'll never forget him. Yeah. But it was quite interesting. So yeah, that's what I did do that.
I wish, honestly, I wish as CRNAs, we had that kind of experience, something like if we're lucky, we get a cadaver lab, and then, everybody always hits a simulation lab with a dummy, but those are all preset. So being able to do something live and in the field as, kind of out there as it sounds, as, an animal's injured, go save it. But I think that would just be invaluable for our critical thinking and the airway skills and everything we do in the OR. I wish we had something like that. So you chose to go the NP route over CRNA, midwife. What made you choose to do NP, and then on top of that, double down and go into management as opposed to sticking by the bedside?
Yeah, so CRNA, I get it, totally awesome, respectable field, gotta be super smart. I think mine was family work-life balance. In order to go to a good CRNA school, you gotta leave town, and you gotta kind of commit to that. I had multiple kids at that time. My wife was pregnant. So I didn't want my family to really know that I was in school by like struggling and eating ramen noodles every day. And I still had some military benefits left and all that kind of stuff. And so I think some of it was convenience. Some of it was, I really enjoyed the bedside, man. I love managing patients. I love being with sick folks. And I know CRNA, as tough as it is, a lot of times you got a curtain between you and your patient. And there's some level of disconnect. I really like seeing people, touching patients, all the things, the senses, the procedures, the high octane nature of the profession. And so I decided to go back as acute care nurse practitioner. And so that was, kind of my thought process as far as that goes. And then, like I said, I only applied to one nursing school when I was getting my bachelor's and finishing. Like I said, I was in criminal justice at the time. I wanted to go in the FBI back before I joined the military. And then health and human sciences is that I was like, hey, I'm a pretty good corpsman. And then I actually worked at FedEx when I got out of the military. And it's actually a really, you can make a lot of money with FedEx Ground. It's independent contractors. So I was a subcontractor. And then, like in any profession, right, you look to the people that are above you. And like these guys have been doing it forever. And they're all great people in their own right. It's just not something I wanted to do long term. So I was like, I was going through some life changes at that time. And I was like, what? Screw it. I'm going back to school. And I just thought I was doing good with the corpsman. So some of it was convenience from a degree perspective. Some of it was I really enjoyed it. And so I only applied to Georgia State Nursing School. And how tough nursing schools are to get in. And they were pretty tough back then because there were even less of them. Mm-hmm. And Georgia State was super cheap. And so I put all my eggs in one basket. I remember my gunnery sergeant wrote me my recommendation letter, and he's such a hard ass. And he told me, he was like, yeah, I wrote a thing about you pulling a kid out of a burning building, which I did. But it was just funny that he remembers stuff like that, because you think about those people who are like such hard asses, you don't know they remember all the little things. So I did that. And actually, I really am proud of my essay I wrote to get into nursing school, which was like, should you get a combat action, or should you get a Purple Heart for PTSD suffered in the military? So that was what my essay was on. So I thought it was actually pretty interesting, which is probably a conversation in and of itself.
You said you get a Purple Heart for PTSD?
I don't know. I mean, I had PTSD pretty bad, which I think every single Marine that I was with, whether they had it I recognized it very quickly. I think everybody kind of goes through it if you go into war. Like if you get a combat action ribbon, you're going to have some PTSD. So military recognizes it. I don't know. Purple Heart is something like physical injury. It's different. So I don't know. I mean, I had a different point of view back then because I was still in the thick of it all, I think, mentally. And so I think I was arguing for it at the time. However, now that I look back, I don't know. I mean, obviously context changes, your point of view changes, and it's a great question and it's a great discussion. But it is real. And every single Marine that I kept in contact with had PTSD. And I think some of them, unfortunately, didn't recognize it for quite a while. I mean, not to go on a soapbox, but I mean, imagine being in the front line for 8-9 months, and then they just take you out of it. I mean, it's like you have drugs. You've been taking a drug for 8 or 9 months. You don't realize like how much adrenaline you had pumping through your system, and then they take you out of it. And so like you go home, and then they put like mustard on your burger at Burger King, and you like freak out to the point where they're about to call the police on you, and you're like, oh, I probably need to go. And so, you kind of have or you're late on a bill, and you have the same response that you were in concert, but like you can't do that at home, right? You're like carrying a gun around and like, ramming trucks into walls, trying to make noise to engage with the enemy, or you're seeing like people get blown up. And it's like, you can't have the same reactions in concert you do at home. So it's real. They don't teach you how to just turn it off. Like it's not possible, right? So like you can't turn it off. You have to. I mean, actually, thankfully, I had met with a therapist when I was a kid because I had some, kind of issues as everybody does when they're a kid, whether you think you do or don't. So I very early recognized that I could not deal with it on my own. And so I met with a therapist for probably about a year. And then it helped me kind of figure out some coping mechanisms. And then I think through difficult relationships in my life, continually, I've kind of learned how to utilize fine tune those tools to figure out how to not, kind of deal with my own emotions. So yeah, I mean, I put all my eggs in one basket in Georgia State. Thankfully, I got in. I knew that I wanted to be a nurse at Grady. I put all my eggs in one basket. I bugged Dr. O'Sullivan, who was like the lady who was over the nurse extern program, and I got in that. I put all my eggs in one basket with SICU because I was like, this is the only job I want. I want to work on the trauma ICU. That's it. And then I was able to do that. That's where I met you. You were my preceptor when I was like a student, when I was like,
good times.
Yeah, man. And then I put all my eggs in one basket with cardiovascular medicine. I did all my clinicals with CT surgery at Grady. And then I, thankfully got a job at local hospital, high volume cardiovascular center, ECMO. It was freaking awesome. I loved that job. And, I started to understand that I wanted to do more. And then through my connections at Grady, I'm saying the name, but through my connections, I was able to get a job, vice president of nursing at the time, critical care nursing, took a chance on me. I mean, we met, we had discussions. I went through a really long interview process, and relatively speaking, and she took a chance on me and gave me an opportunity that, based on my experience, I probably shouldn't have had. And then I was actually in charge of nurses while I was figuring out what to do with the program. And she gave me a bunch of, programs to be in charge of, initiatives to be lead on, which kind of helped me learn how to manage people and situations. And I thankfully didn't fail too terribly. And I kept moving. And then I grew the program from 0 nurse practitioners and PAs to now I'm over 70 and need like 110. So it's like exponentially growing and growing and growing and growing. So it's super interesting. And honestly, like, I'm a bedside person, but now I don't work as much at the bedside anymore just because I can't. I mean, if I do, then like, it's too much, and I'm okay with that. I think the good news is a part about management and managing people on the front line is continuing to have them to have respect for you, knowing that you don't work in their respective situation. So maintaining that respect is a challenge at times, but I think I've found a sweet spot. But yeah, so that's kind of like long and short of it is it's kind of how my trajectory in from like uber frontline person to like actually, being a leader.
And, I struggle with some of the same issues when it comes to balancing your leadership and your clinical, for me, but the majority of what I do is, kind of back end, management and office work and working with different programs for my company. And at the same time, I'm like, all right, I got to make sure I get into clinical a couple of days a week because if I'm not one of these brilliant CRNAs like everybody else. If I don't use it, I lose it. So I'm like, I got to get in there and I still got to intubate people. I still got to do these cases, and I have to keep my skills fresh. So, but it's hard. It really like that balance for your work of what you love to do and what you do, and keeping everything going is always really challenging. So you talked about getting placed in your role of leadership. Tell me a little bit about how important networking and building your brand for this kind of role is for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you notice a theme in like talking about getting into Georgia State, getting accepted by Grady for their extern program, going to my, the other institution where I did cardiovascular ICU, to coming back to my institution to be a leader. None of that would have been possible had I not built relationships with people. I mean, at Georgia State, I knew the lady who was in charge of admissions for the nursing school because I had been by her office so much. I actually, at FedEx, delivered downtown to Georgia State. So I legit would like walk in there and be like, hey, did you get everything? Hey, what's your name? How you doing? Where are you going? And, like building relationships, right? And then with Grady, same thing. When I wanted to be an extern, I went up to Ms. O'Sullivan's office and was like, hey, how you doing? Where you going? How you feel? This is me. I'm Drew. This is my background. And then, when I went to Grady, same thing, like this nurse, leader, educator, I don't know what I always screw up her title. I've known her for years, but it's Barbara McLean. Like I basically like hung on every word she said and just learned so much. And, if you know her, she's like just the only person I probably spoke to that's just like makes me feel like I need to go back to school continuously.
Same here. Barbara's brilliant. I've talked to her many times.
Yeah. And so like, and she's, one of the people that's been instrumental in providing opportunities for me. And then just like along with in my job currently, I mean, literally, as a leader, it's tough. You can't be everybody's friend, but you as long as you're fair, you'll continue to, people will have respect for you, even if, in the immediate sense, they disagree with you or think that you're doing something that is like stupid or whatever word they put on it. They'll at least respect you after things are settled. Because I think as a leader, as long as you do things with, you don't have to be a leader to be a leader, if that makes sense. Like you can be a leader and be a frontline employee, or people can look up to you. So I can't even emphasize the amount, and like, who wants to argue with people? Like I enjoy building things and having fun. Like I told you, my whole objective every day is to like enjoy my day. And so like, I like to have fun. I like to tell jokes. I like to talk to people, and, there's time for doing that and there's time for business. So as far as like, networking, that's networking. You don't burn bridges. It's not like high school when you break up with somebody over a text message, right? It's like you gotta have conversations with people, and if you disagree, do it in a way where it can be thought. You can think about it later, and it's not like emotional. And they'll be like, well, you know what? I might have not been right, but we had a good conversation. I may not agree with that person, but you know what? Damn it, I respect them.
People don't realize about the whole burning bridges thing. Like I talk to so many medical providers to where, they go out middle finger blazing on a lot of things. And I'm like, guys, like, this is a really small community. Like, even if you completely disagree or hate the person you're with, I'm like, always go out respectfully. Hey, thank you so much. This is not the opportunity for me at this time. Please keep me in mind for future, blah, blah, blah. But like, just always be polite, because you never know.
Yeah. Well, like I said, even if you're not polite, be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
You can argue and disagree without being a complete jerk.
Yeah.
And so, like, stand up for your principles if you think you have them and you think you're in the right. And you can be wrong, and like, they know you're wrong. But if you try, at least your heart's in the right place, then, I think you can still be respected if you see that person down the line. And I can't tell you how many disagreements, like bad disagreements I've had with people, where either I'm really wrong or they're really wrong. But you know what? We were like mano a mano, and like, we can come back, 6 months, 2 months, however many months later, and move on. And I mean, that's the name of the game. And I think that, more times than not, I would like to think that people say, he tries to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. He was an idiot at one time, but, at least he like fixed it, or like he recognized it, or the next time I spoke to him, it was cool. So at least like there's like an even keel that goes along with it.
It's that emotional intelligence that, we have, where we just treat, right. If you treat everybody like a colleague, whether you agree or you disagree, you're always better off in my book. And it's interesting because we talk about brand building and networking. So like the first time I ever actually realized it's a small world was when I was applying for CRNA school. So it's when you go to CRNA school, when you go, I applied for a handful of them, and for most of the entry processes, you go sit essentially in front of a tribunal for your interview. So there's right. like 4 or 5 doctors and CRNAs, and they're all asking you questions that you have no clue about, right. And they're trying to see if you'll crack, see if they can get you to cry. And, I went through a couple of these, and it was brutal, just brutal. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to get into any of these schools. And then the school I actually went to, they were hammering on me, and I was beating me up. And one of the anesthesiologists looks at my resume and goes, "Hey, you came from Grady's SICU?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's where I did all my." And he went, "Oh," and every single person in front of me that was just destroying me leans back in their chair and just starts going, "Hey, is Dr. So-and-so still there? Tell me some of the craziest stories that you've seen. Do they still got the group of like homeless guys that root for the people coming in with it? Do they still got this?" Like, I mean, like, and it was so funny where, because I had that on my resume and I had that, I had that name, it was like that network and that brand was complete. And, and sure enough, I got into a few CRNA schools, but I almost immediately got into that one. And it was like, wow, like just doing a good job and making the right connections really does go a lot for your career.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I can't tell you how many, as somebody who's hired, 100 or so people over the past 5 years, 6 years, it's like, I can't tell you how many times where either I've heard about myself through people, or I've got recommendations from people by people, you're like, I knew your wife because you know me. And I mean, I'm sure if you thought I was a complete moron and total loser, you wouldn't want your wife to work with me, right? So like, it's just stuff like that, and we didn't work together for like a million years. We worked together long enough to where I think we both had a, understanding of each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's going to do it for today's show. I'm really stoked to continue listening to this conversation, so make sure you check out part 2 next week with Matthew and Drew. If you'd like to learn more about Drew's journey, check out his contact info in the show notes. Until next time, stay safe and take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA Podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.